The great hall of the Galactic Council was cold. It was always cold, because the Velen liked it that way, and what the Velen liked, everyone else had to accept. Ambassador Han Sumin stood in the center of the speaking circle, her voice echoing against walls that had heard 1,000 pleas and granted none. 40,000 people, she said. 40,000 civilians, children, families. They burned New Bizin to the ground while your council watched and did nothing. The Oran representative floated above its seat, a being of pure light that had existed for millions of years. It spoke without emotion. The incident falls within Velen Dominion jurisdiction. We cannot interfere in internal matters. Sumin felt her hands shake. She had spent 30 years as a diplomat. She had smiled when she wanted to scream. She had bowed when she wanted to fight. But standing here, with the ashes of 40,000 souls weighing on her heart, she found that her patience had finally died. Internal matters, she repeated. They were human beings. They were our people. They were living on Dominion territory, the Oran said. The Velen have rights over their territory. Sumin looked around the great hall. Representatives from 40 species sat in their designated seats. Some looked away. Some pretended to study their devices. None of them would speak. None of them ever spoke when the Velen were involved. She walked out without another word. There was nothing left to say. 3 days later, Admiral Park Jinwoo stood in the ruins of New Bizan. The colony had been beautiful once. Green parks, tall buildings, schools where children learned about Earth, a planet most of them would never see. Now it was ash and silence. Jinwoo walked slowly through the destruction. His boots crunched on broken glass. The smell of burning still hung in the air, even though the fires had stopped days ago. Rescue teams moved in the distance, but there was no one left to rescue. He stopped when he saw something in the debris. A small toy half buried in the ash. A stuffed animal that some child had loved. Jinwoo picked it up carefully, brushed off the dust, and held it in his hands. He had been a soldier for 40 years. He had seen death before. But something about this small toy, this innocent thing that belonged to a child who would never play again, broke something inside him. Or perhaps it fixed something. Perhaps it burned away the last of his doubt. Jinwoo placed the toy gently on a piece of broken wall. He stood straight, looked at the empty sky, and made a silent promise. 2 weeks later, he traveled to a place that did not exist on any map. Deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, buried under kilometers of rock, and protected by technology that made it invisible to every scanner in the galaxy, was humanity's greatest secret. The bunker was massive. Thousands of people worked here, and had worked here for 3 generations. Scientists, engineers, soldiers. All of them dedicated to one purpose. All of them waiting for a day they hoped would never come. Dr. Kim Tae-yun was waiting when Jinwoo arrived. The scientist was young for his position, barely 40, but his eyes held the weight of someone much older. He had spent his entire life working on Project Echo. His father had worked on it before him, and his grandfather before that. "Admiral," Tae-yun said, "I heard about the council meeting." "They refused to help," Jinwoo said. "As expected, then we proceed?" Jinwoo did not answer immediately. He walked through the facility, looking at the weapons they had built in secret. The ships hidden in asteroids. The technology that was generations ahead of anything the galaxy had ever seen. For 120 years, humanity had pretended to be primitive. They had accepted insults. They had paid tribute. They had bowed and scraped and acted like the weak species everyone believed them to be. And all the while, they had prepared. "Show me the fleet," Jinwoo said. Tae-yun led him to a viewing room. The lights dimmed, and a holographic display filled the space. Thousands of ships appeared, scattered across the solar system in hidden locations. Battleships, carriers, destroyers, an armada that no one knew existed. 3,200 vessels, Tayan said, all equipped with echo technology. The Velen have nothing that can match them. And the ground forces? General Choi Sunwoo stepped out of the shadows. He was an old soldier, scarred from a dozen battles that the galaxy never knew humanity had fought. 5 million troops ready for deployment. Another 10 million in reserve. We have been training for this moment for a century, Admiral. Jinwoo looked at the holographic fleet. So many ships. So many soldiers. So many people who would die if he gave the order. The Velen have sent their demands, Ambassador Han Sumin said. She had arrived while they were talking, her face still carrying the exhaustion of her journey from the Council. High Overlord Torvax wants 10 million humans as labor compensation. He claims new Bizanode debts to Velen traders. Labor compensation? Sunwoo spat. He means slaves. He has given us 30 days to comply, Sumin continued. If we refuse, he promises to take what he wants by force. Silence filled the room. Everyone looked at Admiral Park Jinwoo. The decision was his. It had always been his. 3 generations of preparation, all leading to this moment. Jinwoo thought about the toy in the ashes. He thought about the children of New Bizan. He thought about all the years of humiliation, all the times humanity had been forced to bow, all the lives lost because the galaxy saw them as weak. He thought about what would happen next. War, death, destruction. Thousands of his own people would die. Perhaps millions. There was no guarantee they would win, no matter how prepared they were. The Velen Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had crushed every species that opposed them. But Jinwoo also thought about what would happen if they did nothing. More colonies burned. More children dead. More years of slavery and humiliation. Eventually, the Velen would take everything anyway. It was only a matter of time that the choice was not between war and peace. The choice was between fighting now, while they were strong, or waiting until they were too weak to fight at all. Jinwoo looked at the faces around him. Scientists who had given their lives to this moment. Soldiers who had trained in secret for decades. A diplomat who had finally stopped believing in words. He spoke one sentence: begin mobilization. The order went out that night. Across Earth, across every human colony, messages were delivered in secret. The waiting was over. The hiding was done. Humanity was going to war dock in the darkness between Mars and Jupiter. Something was waking up. Captain Lee Yuna stood on the bridge of the battleship, resolute, and watched through the viewport as lights began to flicker across the asteroid field. One by one, ships that had been sleeping for decades came to life. The asteroids were not asteroids at all. They were shells, hollow rocks that hid humanity's secret fleet. For 100 years, workers had carved out these hiding places. Engineers had built ships inside them. Crews had trained in simulators, waiting for a call they hoped would never come. Now the call had come. Yuna gripped the railing as the Resolute powered up around her. She felt the hum of the engines through the deck plates. The lights on the bridge shifted from dim emergency red to full operational light. Around her, officers took their stations with quiet efficiency. No one spoke more than necessary. They had trained for this moment too many times to need words. All systems online, her first officer reported. Fleet status, 94% operational. The remaining ships will be ready within 6 hours. Yuna nodded. 94%. Over 3,000 ships ready for war. The galaxy thought humanity had maybe 50 vessels, old and poorly armed. They had no idea. She thought about her brother. Sung-ho had been a teacher on New Bizan. He taught young children how to read, how to write, how to dream of a future among the stars. When the Velen attacked, He had stayed behind to help evacuate his students. He managed to save 37 children before the fire caught him. Yuna had not cried when she heard the news. There would be time for tears later. Right now, there was only the mission. "Captain," communications officer said, "we are receiving a fleet-wide broadcast from Admiral Park." "Put it through." The holographic display at the center of the bridge flickered to life. Admiral Park Jinwoo appeared, his face calm and steady. He was broadcasting not just to the fleet, but to every screen in the galaxy. This was the moment humanity would stop hiding. "To all who can hear this message," Jinwoo began. "I am Admiral Park Jinwoo of the United Earth Federation. For 120 years, humanity has been a member of the Galactic Council. For 120 years, we have followed the rules. We have paid tribute. We have accepted the protection of the Velan Dominion." His voice hardened. "And for 120 years, we have been treated as slaves. Our colonies have been raided. Our people have been taken. Our pleas for justice have been ignored. 2 weeks ago, the Velan burned New Bizan. 40,000 innocent people died. When we asked the Council for help, they called it an internal matter." Jinwoo paused. When he spoke again, his words were ice. "The Velan Dominion has demanded that we surrender 10 million of our people as slaves. We refuse. The United Earth Federation formally declares war upon the Velan Dominion. We will accept nothing less than unconditional surrender. To the Velan and all who support them, you have made an enemy of humanity. You will regret it." The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched in stunned silence. On the Velan homeworld, High Overlord Torvax received the declaration in his throne room. He was old, even by Velan standards. His scales faded to a dull gray, but his eyes still held the cold cruelty that had made him supreme ruler for 300 years. "Play it again," he ordered. His servants obeyed. He watched the human admiral speak his defiant words, and then Torvax did something unexpected. He laughed. "These creatures are more foolish than I thought," he said. "Send a battle group to Earth. 500 ships should be enough to remind them of their place." "Only 500, Overlord?" his military advisor asked. "Our intelligence suggests they may have more ships than we believed." "Then send 500 and show them what Velan power means," Torvax said. "I want their admiral brought to me alive. I will enjoy teaching him humility." The battle group launched 3 days later. 500 warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity was supposed to have. They dropped out of hyperspace near Earth's moon, weapons charged, expecting to find a terrified planet ready to surrender. Instead, they found 3,000 human warships waiting in perfect formation. Captain Lee Yuna sat in her command chair as the Velan fleet appeared on her sensors. 500 ships. The enemy thought that would be enough. They thought humanity was weak. They thought wrong. "All ships, this is Captain Lei," she broadcast. "First wave, form up on me. Second wave, hold position until my signal. Remember your training. Remember New Bizan. Today, we show them who we are." The Resolute led the charge. Yuna felt the ship surge forward, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not from joy. From purpose. The Velan opened fire first. Their weapons were powerful, designed to destroy any ship in the galaxy. But the human shields held. Echo technology absorbed the energy, converted it, redirected it. The Velan shots splashed harmlessly against barriers that should not have existed. Then the humans fired back. Lieutenant Kang Minji was 22 years old, the youngest pilot in the fleet. She flew a fighter that was barely larger than a transport shuttle, but it was fast enough to make physics cry. She dove toward a Velan cruiser, dodging fire that would have killed any other pilot. "Watch this," she said to herself. She pulled a maneuver that her instructors had said was impossible. Her ship spun, flipped, and dove directly into the cruiser's engine exhaust port. She fired once, twice, 3 times, then pulled out just as the cruiser exploded behind her. "Cruiser down," she reported. "Moving to next target." The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, 500 Velen ships drifted dead in space. Some had been destroyed. Others were disabled, their crews captured. Not a single human ship had been lost. On the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Lee Yuna looked at the wreckage. This was just the beginning. The Velen would send more ships. They would send their entire fleet if they had to. But now they knew the truth. Humanity was not weak. Humanity had never been weak. They had simply been waiting. On Velen Prime, High Overlord Torvax received the battle report. His advisors stood in terrified silence as he read the numbers. 500 ships destroyed. 0 enemy losses. Battle duration, 11 minutes. For the first time in 300 years, the color drained from his scales. How is this possible? He whispered. No one answered. No one could. A second report arrived moments later. The human fleet was not staying at Earth. They were moving. Coming toward Velen Prime, coming for him, Torvax looked at his throne, the seat of power he had held for centuries. He looked at his advisors, who had always told him what he wanted to hear. He looked at the report that showed his empire's destruction beginning. And he finally understood that he had made a terrible mistake. The humans were not cattle. They were not slaves. They were not the weak, primitive species he had always believed them to be. They were something far worse. They were angry. The human fleet did not wait. They did not give the Velen time to recover, time to plan, time to prepare. Within hours of the first battle, 3,000 warships jumped directly to Velen Prime. No species had ever attacked the Velen homeworld. For 10,000 years, it had stood as the center of the Dominion, protected by the largest defense fleet in the galaxy. Thousands of orbital platforms circled the planet. Millions of soldiers waited on the surface. Every child in the galaxy grew up knowing that Velen Prime was untouchable. The humans touched it anyway. Dr. Kim Tae-yan stood in the command center of the flagship Unity, watching the tactical display. Around Velen Prime, the Dominion's defense fleet scrambled to form a protective wall. 2,000 ships, each one built for war, each one crewed by soldiers who had never known defeat. "They outnumber us," Admiral Park Jinwoo said quietly. "Numbers do not matter," Tae-yan replied. "Not today." He activated Project Echo. The satellites had been deployed during the initial jump, scattered across space in a pattern that seemed random but was actually precise. Now they came online, linking together, creating a field that covered the entire Velen defense zone. The effect was immediate. Across 2,000 Velen ships, power systems failed. Weapons went dark. Engines died. Ships that had been preparing to fight suddenly drifted helpless, their crews staring at dead controls. What happened? Velen captains screamed into their communicators. What did they do? No one could answer. Echo technology was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. It did not destroy ships. It simply made them stop. Every system designed for war went silent, while life support and communications continued to function. Admiral Park Jinwoo opened a channel to the paralyzed fleet. "Velen forces, your weapons are disabled. Your ships cannot fight. You have 2 choices. Surrender and be treated with honor, or resist and die. Choose now." Some chose to resist. They tried to ram human ships with their dead vessels. They ejected in escape pods and fired personal weapons at passing fighters. They screamed defiance even as they were captured, but most chose to surrender. Thousands of Velen soldiers, the proudest warriors in the galaxy, laid down their arms and waited to be taken prisoner. They had no other choice. The orbital battle was over in less than an hour. Not a single human ship was scratched. General Choi, Sun Wu watched the surface of Velen Prime grow larger through the transport's window. He was 67 years old, a veteran of secret wars that the galaxy never knew humanity had fought. He had trained his whole life for this moment. Landing in 5 minutes, the pilot announced. Sun Wu looked at the soldiers around him. 500,000 humans, packed into transports, ready to invade a world that had never been invaded. They were young, most of them. Children of colonies who had grown up hearing stories of Velen cruelty. They had joined the military, knowing this day would come. "Remember your training," Sun Wu said over the command channel. "The Velen ground forces are dangerous. They are fast, they are strong, and they do not surrender easily. But they have never faced an enemy like us. They do not know what we are capable of. Today, we show them." The transports hit atmosphere. Anti-aircraft fire reached up toward them, but eco-technology had disabled most of the planetary defenses. The transports landed in waves, disgorging soldiers onto the surface of humanity's greatest enemy. The Velen were waiting. They were reptilian creatures. Taller than humans, stronger than humans, covered in scales that could stop a knife. For 10,000 years, they had been the most feared warriors in the galaxy. Species surrendered rather than face them. In ground combat, humans did not surrender. The first battle happened in the streets of the capital city. Velen soldiers charged with weapons blazing, expecting the humans to break and run like every other species they had fought. Instead, the humans stood their ground. They fought from buildings, from vehicles, from holes in the ground. They took wounds that should have killed them and kept fighting. A young soldier named Do-Yun was shot 3 times in the first hour of combat. He wrapped bandages around his wounds with one hand while firing his weapon with the other. His squad had been cut off from the main force, surrounded by Velen troops who smelled blood and wanted to finish them. "We should surrender," one of his squadmates said. "We cannot win this." "Then we die fighting," Do-Yun replied. "But we do not surrender. Never." They held their position for 6 hours, until reinforcements arrived. When the rescue team found them, Do-Yun was still conscious, still holding his weapon, still watching for enemies. The Velen bodies around their position numbered in the dozens. Stories like this happened across the planet. Humans who refused to quit. Humans who fought when they should have fallen. Humans who terrified the Velen, not with weapons, but with will. Elder Malix of the Kirathi Collective watched from orbit. His ship was far from the battle, officially neutral, but he had come to see the impossible happening. The Kirathi were traders, not warriors. They had survived for millennia by never taking sides in conflicts, but Malix could not look away from what was happening. Below Dot, he watched human soldiers capture a Velen hospital, and then post guards to protect the patients inside. He watched human medics treating wounded Velen soldiers alongside their own injured. He watched human commander accept the surrender of a Velen general and then offer him water and food. "They are monsters," his aide said. "Look how they fight. Nothing stops them." "No," Malix replied softly. "They are not monsters. Monsters destroy everything. These humans destroy only what threatens them. Look, they spare the civilians. They protect the children. They offer mercy to those who surrender. Then what are they?" Malix thought for a long moment. "They are what we should have been. What all of us should have been." On the 6th day, Captain Lee Yuna led her squadron through the shattered defenses of the Imperial Palace. The building was ancient, built when the Velen first conquered their homeworld. For 10,000 years, the overlords had ruled from its halls. Today, that rule would end. Her soldiers breached the throne room door. Inside, surrounded by his personal guards, sat High Overlord Torvax. He was old, his scales dull, but his eyes still held defiance. "So the vermin have come to kill me," he said. Yun. A raised her weapon. Her finger touched the trigger. She thought about her brother, burned alive trying to save children. She thought about the 40,000 dead of New Bizon. She thought about every human who had suffered under Velen rule. One shot, and it would be over. "Captain," one of her soldiers said quietly. "Your orders?" Yuna lowered her weapon. "Arrest him," she said. "He will stand trial for his crimes. He will face justice, not revenge." Torvax stared at her in confusion. "You do not kill me?" Yuna stepped closer, looking into the eyes of the creature who had caused so much pain. "Death would be too easy. You will answer for every life you took, every colony you burned, every child who died because of your cruelty. You will face your victims, and you will know that you lost everything." She handcuffed the overlord of the Velen Dominion and led him from his throne room. Outside, the Velen flag was coming down. In its place, rising slowly in the morning light, flew the banner of Earth. A war for Velen Prime had taken 6 days. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years had fallen in less than a week, but humanity was not finished. Not yet. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Velen Prime had fallen. The High Overlord was captured. The empire that had ruled with iron claws for 10,000 years was broken. On 100 worlds, slaves who had served the Velen for generations looked up at the sky and dared to hope. On 100 more, species that had paid tribute and bowed in fear began to whisper words they had never spoken aloud: freedom, rebellion, revolution, the Oran Assembly. Those ancient beings of light who had called themselves peacekeepers while watching empires burn convened an emergency session. Their great hall, which had existed for millions of years, was filled with chaos. Representatives from every species in the galaxy demanded answers, demanded action, demanded something. Ambassador Han Suman walked into that chaos with her head held high. She was different now. The woman who had begged for help and been refused was gone. In her place stood someone who had watched her people go to war and win. Someone who no longer asked for permission. "The human delegation requests the floor," she said. Her voice was not loud, but somehow it cut through the noise. The hall fell silent. The Oran representative floated forward. "Ambassador Han, the Assembly wishes to express concern about recent events. Your species has engaged in unauthorized military action against a council member." "The Velen attacked us first," Suman replied. "They killed 40,000 of our people. When we asked for help, you called it an internal matter. We handled it internally. You have conquered their homeworld. Yes, you have captured their leader. He will face trial for his crimes. Something your assembly never had the courage to do." Murmurs rippled through the hall. No one spoke to the Oran this way. No one challenged the ancient peacekeepers who had watched civilizations rise and fall. Suman continued. "We did not ask for this war. We did not want it. But we will not apologize for defending ourselves. And we will not stop until every world under Velen oppression is free. You cannot simply rewrite the galactic order," the Oran said. Suman smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Watch us." That same day, Admiral Park Jingwu broadcast a message to every system in the galaxy. He stood on the bridge of the Unity, still wearing the uniform he had not changed since the war began. "To all who hear this," he said, "humanity does not seek empire. We do not want to rule over other species. We did not fight this war for conquest. We fought because we had no other choice." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "But we know that the Velen did not only hurt humanity. For 10,000 years, They enslaved other species. They took your worlds. They stole your children. They broke your spirits. Today, we offer you a choice. We will help free any world that asks for help. We will fight alongside any species that wants to break their chains. But we will not force freedom on anyone. The choice is yours. The response was immediate. From a dozen worlds, messages came flooding in. Pleas for help. Requests for alliance. Cries of hope from people who had given up hope long ago. The Kirathi Collective was the first to respond officially. Elder Malix, who had watched the battle for Velen Prime from his ship, returned to his people with a report that changed everything. I saw them fight, he told the Collective's ruling council. They are terrifying. They do not stop. They do not surrender. They do not know fear. But I also saw them show mercy. I saw them protect enemy civilians. I saw them treat prisoners with honor. They could have burned Velen Prime to ash. Instead, they built refugee camps. What are you suggesting? The council leader asked. I am suggesting that we have been cowards for too long. We traded with the Velen because it was profitable. We ignored their crimes because it was convenient. The humans have shown us what courage looks like. I believe we should stand with them. The vote was close, but the Kirathi Collective officially declared support for humanity. Trade rights. Intelligence sharing. A promise of neutrality that leaned heavily toward friendship. Other species followed. Some out of hope. Some out of fear. Some because they saw which way the wind was blowing and wanted to be on the winning side. And across the galaxy, the liberation began. Lieutenant Kong Minji led her fighter squadron to a mining world called Dust. It was a terrible place. A planet of rocks and caves where humans had been enslaved for 60 years. The Velen used them to dig precious metals out of the ground. Those who could not work were killed. Those who could work wished they were dead. Minji expected to find broken people, spirits crushed by decades of suffering. Instead, she found something that made her heart stop. The slaves were fighting back. They had hidden weapons stolen from their guards. They had memorized patrol schedules and guard rotations. They had sabotaged mining equipment and hidden supplies. For 60 years, they had waited for someone to come. And now that help had arrived, they were not going to sit and watch. An old woman named Grandmother Jinseo had organized the resistance. She was 73 years old, her back bent from decades of labor, but her eyes burned with fire that age could not dim. We knew someone would come, she told Minji. We never stopped believing. Every child born in these mines was taught to hope. Every death was a promise that someday we would be free. Minji stood before this old woman who had survived horrors she could not imagine. And for the first time since the war began, she cried. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry it took so long. Grandmother Jinseo took her hand. You came. That is what matters. You came. The liberation of Dust took 3 days. The Velen garrison, cut off from reinforcement and surrounded by both human soldiers and rebellious slaves, surrendered without much fighting. They had seen what happened on their homeworld. They knew resistance was pointless. When it was over, Minji helped Grandmother Jinseo walk out of the mines and into sunlight. The old woman stood blinking in the brightness, breathing air that did not taste of dust and despair. I never thought I would see the sky again, she whispered. You will see much more than that, Minji promised. Back on Earth, Dr. Kim Tae-yun stood in his laboratory, watching broadcasts from across the galaxy. Liberation after liberation. World after world breaking free. The technology he had spent his life developing was changing everything. His assistant, a young woman named Harry, approached him with a question that many were asking. Doctor, how did we do it? How did humanity develop technology so far beyond everyone else? We have only been in space for a few centuries. The Velan had 10,000 years. Tayan smiled sadly. He thought about his father, who had died working on Project Echo, his grandfather, who had started it all. 3 generations of kin scientists, all dedicated to one impossible goal. We spent 120 years pretending to be primitive, he said. Every insult, every humiliation, we used that time. We let them think we were weak. We let them laugh at our old ships and simple technology. And while they laughed, we worked. But why? Why did we hide for so long? Because we knew we would only get one chance. If we revealed our strength too early, they would have destroyed us before we were ready. We had to wait until we were certain. Until we had weapons they could not match. Until we had ships they could not stop. Tai Yun looked at the liberation broadcasts. Slaves walking free. Tyrants in chains. A galaxy being reborn. They never considered that we were preparing, he said. They looked at us and saw animals, primitives, creatures to be used and discarded. They never bothered to look deeper. And that was their greatest mistake. Outside the laboratory window, the sun was setting over Earth, the planet that had been dismissed as unimportant, the species that had been treated as worthless, the civilization that had just changed the galaxy forever. And the war was not over yet. 1 year after the war began, it ended. Not with a final battle, but with a trial. The Great Hall had been built specifically for this moment. Representatives from every species in the galaxy filled the seats. Cameras broadcast to billions of worlds. And in the center of the room, in chains that glowed with soft light, stood High Overlord Torvax. He looked smaller now. A year of imprisonment had taken the pride from his scales and the fire from his eyes. The creature who had ruled the galaxy with terror now stood waiting to hear his fate from the species he had once called vermin. Ambassador, Han Suman rose to present the case against him. She had not wanted this role. She had spent her life believing in diplomacy, in words, in peaceful resolution. But she had also seen what happened when evil went unpunished. She had seen the ashes of New Bizan. The defendant stands accused of genocide, she began, of systematic slavery, of the destruction of 12 human colonies, of crimes against 17 other species who suffered under his rule. She spoke for 3 hours. She showed evidence that made representatives weep. She named victims who could not speak for themselves. She built a case so thorough and so devastating that even Torvax's defenders could not find words to respond. When she finished, the hall was silent. The tribunal took only 1 hour to deliberate. Guilty on all counts. Torvax would spend the rest of his long life in prison, watched by guards from every species he had wronged. Death would have been kinder, but death was not justice. Justice required him to live, to know what he had lost, to face his victims every day. As they led him away, Torvax stopped before Admiral Park Jinwoo. The old Velan looked at the human who had destroyed his empire and asked the question that had haunted him since his throne room fell. How? We ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. We crushed every species that challenged us. How did you defeat us so completely? Jinwoo met his eyes. You never saw us. You looked at us and saw what you expected to see. Animals, primitives. You never bothered to look deeper. That is not an answer. Yes, it is. You lost because you believed your own lies. You told yourselves you were superior, and you believed it. You told yourselves we were inferior, and you never questioned it. You were so certain of your own greatness that you could not imagine anyone else being greater. Torvax stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the silent hall. Perhaps you are right, he said. Perhaps we deserve to fall. They took him away. He would never see the sky again. 3 days later, the Oran Assembly formally apologized to humanity. Their representative, The same being of light who had dismissed Suman's plea for help a year ago, stood before the galaxy and admitted what everyone already knew. We failed in our duty. We called ourselves peacekeepers, but we kept peace only for those who did not need it. We ignored suffering when it was convenient. We allowed evil to flourish, because stopping it would have required courage we did not have. Admiral Park Jinwoo listened to the apology. He thought about how much it would have meant a year ago. Now it was just words. "Your guilt is noted," he said when the Oran finished. "Now prove your worth. Help rebuild what was destroyed. Use your wisdom for something other than watching others suffer." The Oran bowed its head. "We will try." On New Bizen, the rebuilding was almost complete. The colony that had been burned to ash was rising again. New buildings stood where old ones had fallen. Parks grew green where fires had blackened the earth. And in the center of it all, a memorial had been built. Admiral Park Jinwoo stood before that memorial on a quiet morning. The names of 40,000 victims were carved into black stone. 40,000 lives that had ended too soon. 40,000 reasons for a war that had changed the galaxy. Captain Lee Yuna found him there. She had been promoted to admiral herself now, though she still preferred her old ship. She carried something in her hands. "I found this in storage," she said. "I thought you might want to see it." It was the toy. The small stuffed animal that Jinwoo had found in the ashes a year ago. Someone had cleaned it, repaired it, kept it safe. Jinwoo took it gently. He remembered that day, standing in the ruins, making a silent promise. He had kept that promise. The war was won. The Velan were defeated. The galaxy was changing, but the children who had died were still gone. No victory could bring them back. "We did it," Yuna said softly. "We won." Jinwoo placed the toy among the memorial stones, letting it rest there with the names of the dead. "Now comes the harder part," he said. "We have to build something worth protecting." The Galactic Council was dissolved 1 month later. In its place rose the Allied Systems Coalition, a partnership of equals that would have seemed impossible just a year before. Humanity was not the leader of this coalition, but neither were they followers. They were simply members, with a voice as loud as any other. General Choi Sunwoo retired from military service. He had spent his entire life preparing for war. Now that war was over, he chose to prepare others. He opened a school on Earth, teaching the next generation of soldiers the lessons he had learned. Fight only when you must. Show mercy when you can. Never forget why you are fighting. Lieutenant Kang Minji became Captain Minji, the youngest ship commander in fleet history. She took grandmother Jinseo to Earth, fulfilling a promise she had made on the mining world of dust. The old woman spent her final years under open skies. Surrounded by the family she had never known she had. Dr. Kim Tae-yan opened his research to all coalition members. The technology that had won the war would now be used to heal, to build, to connect. He often thought about his father and grandfather, who had worked their whole lives on secrets they could never share. They would have been proud. Elder Malex of the Kirthi Collective wrote a record of the war that would become required reading for diplomats across the galaxy. In it, he tried to explain what he had witnessed. For 10,000 years, we believed that power meant domination. The strongest ruled and the weak obeyed. This was the natural order, the only order we could imagine. Then humanity went to war and showed us something else. Their warships carried hospitals. Their soldiers built schools and conquered cities. They fought without hatred and won without cruelty. They could have burned the galaxy and rebuilt it in their image. Instead, they freed the oppressed and punished only the guilty. We asked them how a species so young had become so strong. Their admiral smiled and gave us an answer I will never forget. We had good teachers. We learned what not to become by watching you. Years passed. New species joined the coalition and asked about the human war. They wanted to know how a primitive species had defeated the greatest empire in galactic history. They expected tales of secret weapons and brilliant strategies. Instead, they were told a different story. They were told about a species that had been mocked and enslaved and dismissed. A species that had endured humiliation for generations, not because they were weak, but because they were patient. A species that had prepared in secret, waited in silence, and struck when the moment was right. They were told about soldiers who did not surrender and scientists who dreamed impossible dreams. About generals who showed mercy and admirals who sought justice instead of revenge. And they were given a warning that every species in the galaxy learned to remember. Never mistake patience for weakness. Never mistake kindness for cowardice. Never assume that silence means acceptance. And never, ever give humanity a reason to fight, because they will win. And worse, they will make you understand why you deserve to lose. On Earth, in a small apartment with a view of the stars, Admiral Park Jin-woo sat by his window and watched the night sky. He was old now, his hair white, his hands no longer steady. The war had ended decades ago. The galaxy was at peace, but he still remembered. He remembered the ashes of New Bizin. He remembered the faces of his soldiers. He remembered the weight of decisions that had cost millions of lives and saved billions more. His granddaughter found him there, staring at the stars. "Grandfather, what are you thinking about?" Jin-woo smiled. She was young, born into a galaxy that knew humanity as liberators, not slaves. She would never understand what it had been like before. And that was exactly as it should be. "I am thinking about the future," he said. "I am thinking about what you will build with the peace we won." She sat beside him, looking up at the same stars. "I hope we build something good," she said. Jin-woo put his arm around her. Out there, among those distant lights, billions of beings lived in freedom because humanity had chosen to fight. The war was history now, a story told to children who could barely imagine a time when the Velen ruled everything. "We will," he said. "We always do." Above them, the stars burned bright and endless, full of possibility, full of hope. The galaxy was free, and humanity was home.